you will injure your shoulder over the course of your life if you're active, and then a lot of people seem to just accept that it never heals the same, and it always just has more space, and it always just feels worse. So here I was with my shoulder that was falling out of the socket every time I tried to lift it overhead or extend my arm out in front of me. And that was my grounding thought. Like, hey, I've done this before. Because no one can tell you, like, hey, now it's time to jump to this next exercise, right? Like, that's something I had to feel out, going from, okay, I'm holding away and finding this tension, to, oh, there's something there. Now I need to go foam roll. Now I need to massage. I need to get this tissue broken up. Now that there's space and there's some movement, okay, now I can do some assisted hanging. Now I can start to strength train a little bit. Out of all the things that I learned through this process and understanding my body, understanding anatomy, understanding the healing process, there was just absolutely nothing more important than, I think when a lot of us think about injury, we think about pain, and we think about bruising and tissue damage and broken bones and things that are often like very visible with lots of inflammation. And I would say that's pretty accurate for most injuries. But a sprain like this is something I've never encountered before. And overcoming it was definitely a psychological battle more than anything. And I think that's worth shedding some light on. I was in a yoga teacher training when I received an adjustment for a high lunge twist to open my chest and, turn my upper torso. And the adjustment was just a little bit too forceful and too quick for me to react to. I felt my pec opening and stretching, and it felt like it was definitely stretching too much. And I could feel my shoulder opening more than it's ever opened. And it was very uncomfortable. It's definitely a feeling of like, hey, I'm stretching too much. But I wouldn't describe it as painful. And it wasn't until we were doing a vinyasa flow after that, when we took a high plank and my arm just fell right out of the socket. And it was like in front of my rib cage, which, if you've ever felt before, it's just a horrible feeling. And after that, I had to stop, take my arm, and put it back in the socket after the high plank. And I just remember being like, wow, that's something I haven't really experienced since I was a very small child. And then, of course, the fear hits, and it's like, what positions are safe to move my arm in where that doesn't happen? Because clearly something was very wrong. I had previously been able to just dead hang, and there was never any concern about, my arms coming out of the socket. But apparently that's something that can happen. That's something that a lot of hypermobile people experience. But it was very new to me. And because that's the case, it also created this perception at the time, especially with all the external feedback I was receiving about recovering from an injury like this, is that you will injure your shoulder over the course of your life if you're active, and then a lot of people seem to just accept that it never heals the same, and it always just has more space, and it always just feels worse, and there's something wrong. And that's a terrifying That's a terrifying place to be after an injury, where there's all these people who have reached this consensus that that's just how shoulders work. Thankfully, in the same yoga teacher training, we did cover this injury specifically. We didn't go over everything I experienced, but I kind of knew a little bit some of the things that I was about to be in for. Quick overview of the shoulder joint. The shoulder is the most mobile joint in the entire body. It is a ball and socket joint. And what you have is the humerus, your upper arm bone, and at the end of the humerus, there's something known as the humeral head, the ball. And that fits into a bowl on one end of your scapula. The scapula is the plate-looking bone that sits on the back of your rib cage. And you have a joint that is known, sometimes referred to as a golf ball on a tee. Basically, there's not much bowl holding it in the socket, at least bone-wise. The hip, by contrast and comparison, the bowl portion that is bone is around 2/3 coverage of the ball compared to the shoulder, which is about 1/3, so significantly less, which means the joint has to rely much more on soft tissue to hold it in place. And so what you have are the muscles as the most superficial layer holding the joint in place, but then beneath that you have ligaments, which are fibers made up mostly of collagen, a strong protein that creates structure. It's also in bones and skin and a lot of other parts of your body. And then a little bit of elastin, which creates some elasticity. And those stitch together bone to bone. And so what you have is a sheet of these ligaments, these collagen fibers, which connect from the humeral head to the labrum and what is known as the joint capsule. And you can think of the labrum as basically like a little O-ring, a little rubber O-ring, which kind of lifts up the edges of the bowl and like is what is creating enough space for active suction to be created, which holds the joint in the right place, which holds the golf ball on top of the tee where it's supposed to be. And a sprain is something you might have heard of before, but what I had never heard of is an overstretch, which is a type of sprain, but it's seemingly a bit more invisible. If you imagine ligaments like a rope, basically a full tear is, two pieces of rope. That's pretty self-explanatory. Partial tear is when there's very visible structural damage, like just a chunk of the rope is missing. So that's pretty obvious too. You're going to expect a lot more inflammation if that happens. Or you have my case, which is you can imagine the rope and you can imagine it's pulled, and you might have felt this sensation if you've ever pulled on two ends of a rope where suddenly there's like a little jump and you can feel like, oh, something in the rope is a little bit broken. But the rope still looks fine from the outside. And maybe you see a little bit of fraying, but like overall it still looks pretty much just like a rope. But clearly the structural integrity has been compromised. And that's because if you were to zoom into this rope, you'd see a whole bunch of micro tears all throughout it. And it's just that none of them have actually torn enough to where it's visible. But for all intents and purposes, you've compromised the integrity of the rope. It's got all these micro tears in it now. And so that's something that's known as an overstretch. It's like a mild sprain. And mild, but 6 months later, you're still out of the game in a recovery process dealing with things like neuromuscular inhibition, proprioceptive deficit, and compensation patterns. And those first two are the scariest things that I'd never heard before. Like, I've never heard anyone talk about these things, and it's such a psychological battle to overcome. Neuromuscular inhibition, what it is basically when a ligament is damaged, this surrounding signal to muscles is dimmed. So it's like your brain just isn't really getting signal to the area or from the area. And that just feels like the whole shoulder is offline in a really weird way, where I could, obviously see myself moving my arm, and I could feel if I were to touch my pec, like, okay, it's contracting, it's holding my arm in the place that I want to move it, but it doesn't actually feel like I'm moving my arm. And then proprioceptive deficit is like, not only do you not feel yourself moving your arm, even though you can see yourself moving your arm, spatially you have like your GPS is turned off. You don't know where you are. The map is gone. And that's because, the signal going through the ligament is damaged, and your brain doesn't know where anything is anymore, essentially. And that's why you get neuromuscular inhibition, because your brain is like, hey, I don't know what position the joint is in right now. So let's just downregulate everything, turn everything off, don't use it, because if you use it, maybe you'll re-injure yourself, and that's bad. So just turn it off. The other part of that is functionally, if one part of your body is being downregulated, the muscles are turning off, they're relaxing, your brain doesn't want to use them, then how are you going to stand up straight? How are you going to still move and do things? Your shoulder still does want to stay in the same place. So what you have is a compensation pattern that develops, and this can look like all sorts of things, like tightness in the neck through the trap, tightness in any adjacent uninjured area, because your body wants to create that balance. And so in my case, I overstretched the anterior or the front portion of the joint capsule, and that's why my arm was, coming out forward. But, if I went back, it was fine. And so the pec and the front delt and the biceps were all being downregulated. Couldn't feel those. And the back, as a result, and my serratus, and it's part of my abdomen, the opposite shoulder, my neck, all those went into this like overdrive mode, where the baseline level of tone, of tension that is just held in your muscle when you're living passively just goes way up. And so it's like you can't relax. And so you have these two problems which are completely invisible. I mean, if you look closely, you can see the compensation pattern. You can see like, oh, one collarbone is lower than the other. But to someone who's just seeing you, and you're trying to describe that I have all these problems going on, it's like, what are you talking about? You look fine. There's no bruising. There's no inflammation. Everything's great, right? No, everything's not great. And so thankfully, I was able to research and figure out that, these things have names. I'm not going crazy, but it was definitely surreal to experience and try to describe to people who have no idea what you're talking about. And as far as recovery goes, there's still a lot of consensus and what seems like a lot of belief that like ligaments don't ever heal fully. And that was just a sentiment that I was not willing to accept. And I'm so thankful that I had gone through a prior injury. I snapped my collarbone into 2 pieces, and that healed with a malunion. And at the time when that happened, the doctor told me there's a good chance that you will never be able to throw a baseball again. And so just imagine hearing that from your doctor after you've just snapped your collarbone into 2 pieces. You're sitting there like, what's the diagnosis? What's this looking like? And that's what he says to you. Devastating to hear. But at that time, again, that was a sentiment that I was not willing to accept. And, I had to just believe that the body's always adapting. Your body is always regenerating. There must be a world where that's not true, where I have full range of motion and no problem, and it heals fine. And I took a very active approach to recovery, and that was the case. It took over a year before there was no pain and I was able to do everything again, but that's a really long time. And so here I was with my shoulder that was falling out of the socket every time I tried to lift it overhead or extend my arm out in front of me. And that was my grounding thought. Like, hey, I've done this before. So that was the start of a journey. A very long journey to rehab, to a place where I could once again hang from a bar passively and not worry about my shoulder's gonna just pop out of the socket. And then beyond that, I want to know where my arm is. I want to feel good about throwing things, about moving around. I don't want to feel like I'm disconnected from my own body. That's so important for me. So the first goal became find sensation again. And the first place that I started to try to do this was with a technique that I learned from bodybuilders, which is tapping. So you can tap your muscle and that sends some signal, inside your body, and then you have an awareness of that. And as you do your exercises, if you keep tapping, you can tune into that and engage your muscles more mindfully. And if you're doing an isolation movement, that really helps, especially with using muscles that you might not really have any awareness that are not developed yet. So that was the first place that I turned to, and that was helpful. I was able to get some sensation in my pec again, some sensation in my front delt. But I could tell something wasn't quite right with how the signal was being sent, because I was able to get some awareness of the muscle, but this is a problem with the ligaments, and that's a chain of connection that I haven't had to rehab before. When I was rehabbing my collarbone, the muscle that surrounds that is able to shape the bone much more directly over time. With the ligament, what I was dealing with more so was this passivity of connection, where there's a sensation, but there's not really anything active going on through the musculature. And maybe that sounds weird, but you can kind of think of it like again, a rope where you're connecting 2 pieces, and in the body there are these different fascial slings that help in maintaining that passive connection. And I think more so the case, that's what I was tapping into. This fascial connection was broken. So it wasn't just like the muscle layer. And what this felt like, if you've ever thrown something, you've probably felt the sensation of, if I bring one arm forward, the other leg wants to go back so that I can create tension. And that's because you have a fascial sling that connects from one limb to the opposite limb with an X pattern around the torso. And you can, if you really focus on it, you can feel this kind of wrapping of your arm, the wrapping of the torso, the wrapping of the leg. And that's something that was broken. I could feel my arm moving, but there was no tension down the torso through the leg. Like, that was gone. Which was not just a matter of like, hey, let me make sure my muscles are connected and working. The sensation was like much deeper than that. It was this full fascial sling feeling that was missing and that I needed to find. And what I ended up trying, which was very, very helpful, is just holding 5-pound weights in either of my hands. And this just created a very mild level of tension. And then if you kind of move your shoulder from side to side, I was able to get some of that sensation again of, okay, there's force being transmitted across my body through these fascial slings, and I can feel that on either side. After I got comfortable with this, it was just like the biggest celebratory moment, because, you know, you go from no sensation to, oh, okay, I can feel something again, and it just becomes like this beacon of hope. And so it was just like, okay, keep going towards that. So from there, I started doing some swinging with these 5-pound weights, just very gently at first, and then I was able to work up to doing some bigger and bigger swings. And what I found through that was I could actually feel my muscle trying to glide over what almost felt like a plate of armor underneath my underneath the muscle and over the shoulder joint. I'm not 100% sure if this was fascia or if this was the joint capsule itself. But either way, it was a very odd sensation that clearly was not there before the injury occurred. And it's my understanding that when a bone heals, for example, the first thing your body does is kind of just like put new bone out everywhere. And then those become the building blocks to shape into the new bone. But first you gotta just get the materials to the workplace, to the building site. And something similar happens with ligaments, where your body's like, hey, there's an issue. Start shipping out all of the new tissue. And then it wants to heal as quick as possible, so it just puts these building blocks into place, but all of that tissue is unorganized. And I guess very similarly to bone, but it also felt different when I was moving through this, is you need to actually actively tension and contract the surrounding tissue so that this new tissue that's just spit out everywhere and completely unorganized becomes organized again along the lines of tension, and those fibers become aligned correctly so that everything can move smoothly together. And so that's my hypothesis of what I was tapping into when I felt this plate of armor over my shoulder. And from that moment, I realized this is something that is not something I can just like force my way through with crazy swings or something. Like, this was tissue that needed to be broken up before it could be moved into the right places. And so I found this spiky foam roller, and it was so painful to lay on this, but I put my chest over it and I just rolled through all the parts that felt stuck, that felt sticky, and the spike would get in there and I could feel it being broken up, and that was exactly the sensation I was looking for. It was super uncomfortable. I would honestly describe that sensation as painful, but I think that's exactly what I needed at the time. After incorporating the foam rolling, I started to really feel that sling more with the swings, and then I incorporated some jabs, and specifically with the injury being on the front of the body, what I found which was super helpful was I could engage the front very mindfully if I went across with a jab, and then because again the sling connects through the torso to the opposite limb, if I then either pointed my leg and stuck it out in the opposite direction or bent my knee, then I could really feel the movement going all the way through the hip. And that was very, very reassuring to feel that, hey, this is working again. This is going through my full body. I'm not just working on this very small part that seems like this was the injury zone, but actually fixing this injury locally is a matter of rebalancing my body globally. And that was when I really started thinking more about why this injury even happened in the first place. Because I'd been doing a lot of yoga, which is very still, a lot of isometric holds. And you can get very strong doing that. But I think it also overtrains your type 2 muscle fibers, your ability to hold for a long time. And what can become unbalanced if you don't also supplement that training with something else is your type 1 muscle fibers, your fast twitch, ability to react to muscles, and that brain connection that doesn't get trained. And so you can end up in that situation where I was, where you get that adjustment. And I think if I had trained fast twitch muscle fibers, maybe I would have been able to react more quickly and effectively and avoid the injury. But that was not the case. And what happened. And I think that's also kind of a metaphor for where I was at generally in this time of my life, where I had optimized everything for this very survival mode mentality of the marathon of life, and I had lost my sense of spontaneity and just doing things and trying things and really honestly enjoying life. I feel like this injury showed me a version of myself, a reflection in the mirror that maybe in some ways I was blind to, or I was just overly focused on so many abstract long-term goals that I had no sense of the quick in the moment presence that you just naturally experience from playing a sport or something. And that's when I started to incorporate more dance into my movements. So it became not just, hey, I'm swinging this 5-pound weight around, but how can I move more fluidly? How can I dance around? How can I challenge my body into new shapes and move in new directions where everything is completely unexpected? And I saw so much growth during this time, and I honestly just had so much more fun moving than I've had in a really, really long time. And that's one of those things where it's like, this was an injury, and injuries suck, but I learned so much about myself and my body through this process. I couldn't relate to any of my hypermobile friends when they say their joint came out of the socket. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. That doesn't happen to me. And then suddenly this injury happens, and I don't love that feeling, but all of a sudden I could relate to all these people I care about. And I think there's a beauty in that, and there's a beauty in being able to then help people later just like have an external reference of like, hey, this is what happened to me, what's happening with you, like, let's talk about it. And now there's a reference point, like a point of security, to where you can feel more confident in hopefully your own experience, because that was very hard through this. When everything's down regulated, you're having this compensation patterns, you can feel all this internal chaos, but then externally, again, it's just like, you look fine. Okay, I was watching this back, and there was one thing that I forgot to mention, which I definitely think should be included, because it's such a unique and specific sensation that if you're going through it, I just think it would be so validating to know that someone else knows what you're talking about. Basically, one thing that was happening was that my biceps tendon, it's basically what feels like a little string which goes over your shoulder underneath the front deltoid and then down through the elbow, that was popping out of its groove. And when it would pop back in, it would feel like it's grinding over my shoulder. And then in addition to that, when it's in the wrong place, it feels like it's a bit shorter. So you're like stuck with this little bend in your elbow. You can't fully straighten your arm, and you definitely can't like tension and push away. And then if you finally do like extend out far enough, then it will pop back into the groove, and that gives you that really gross grinding sensation. So this was something I was trying to figure out, like, how do I overcome this? And that's what was nice about the swinging, is that it would create enough tension to where the biceps tendon would stay in its groove, and I could move around and build the conscious awareness to where my brain would be like, okay, it's safe for the shoulder to be in this position, and it's safe for the arm to be extended, and the biceps tendon is in the right place. And then that, I think, also helped all the fibers align, with the rest of the sling. And it didn't take that long for the swinging to reach a point where that sensation of grinding fully went away, which felt like a huge milestone and was just a very, very clear indicator that, like, okay, what I'm doing is actually working. So that was a huge positive reinforcement step. And yeah, I just felt like that needed to be included for completeness. So after I found sensation, goal number 2 then became actually getting stronger. Because just like with muscle shaping the bone, muscle can hold the ligament and hold the joint in the right place. So once I was comfortable feeling the sling, with all the swinging, with some dancing, I got onto a pull-up machine, which was also a dip machine, which is super convenient, because that's exactly what I needed to train, the front of my shoulder. And I knew, like, again, that I was not going to start with a full pull-up. For context, yes, I did try some pull-ups after this injury, like a couple weeks after, and I was still having issues, but I was like, maybe I can just muscle no, it was immediately just coming out as not great. But after a few months, I was able to do this pull-up machine, and I did about half my body weight, and that was enough for me to be able to find that mindful activation again. and really just focus on sending tension in all the right directions through the chains that I knew they should be going through. And I was able to work in some archer pull-ups and some one-arm pull-ups. That was a turning point, getting stronger. I was doing the same things with dips, and I was starting to feel much more confidence through this process. I did weightlifting for a very long time, and this just felt so good to be like, we're back, we're doing it, we're getting stronger. I can feel my body working. I'm tapping into these muscles that were turned off, and the signal is getting brighter. Because part one was just, can I find sensation again at all in any capacity, right? So then the next process becomes, how can we get the signal back up to where it was? And that's when the muscles that have been turned off start to kick in. And as a result, the muscles that have been working too hard can finally relax, which is, for me, living in New York City, this very go place. I would say relaxing is a much harder thing for me to do. So that was so reassuring to feel this compensation pattern being downregulated. Like, oh, my spine is shifting very subtly, but I can feel space in the part of my back which had been compressed on only one side, which feels awful because you're like all lopsided. And it's very subtle again. Like, if you have to look closely and you can see like, oh, okay, one shoulder is lower than the other. But if you're just like looking at me and you're not looking for that, like, it's not obvious. But it feels so like just so real in your body when it's like those three upper vertebrae in your thoracic spine are just like a little too compressed, and you're like, ugh, I want to just stand up straight. And so finally, through this process of getting stronger and getting the muscles to work and the downregulation happening, my spine elongated. And this is such a magical feeling to be able to stand up and stand up straight. And after that, the last part of the process then becomes, can movement become smooth again? And I think this is the place where a lot of people stop, and where, like, I was talking to people who had gone through recoveries, had done rehab, and they're still like, it's never the same. It's always just off now, and it's going to be that way forever, and they just kind of accept that. But I knew something was missing, and the body, again, always wants to adapt. It's always regenerating, and if you can put it in the right environment to elicit the right stresses that create the adaptations you want, you can change. And you can change in the ways that you desire. And so I knew there was some movement that I needed to find that didn't just help me find engagement like the pull-up and the dip, but actually pushed the arm into the socket in the right place actively, so that I can in some way rest and just let the area on a neurological level recalibrate. Because part of what the neuromuscular inhibition is, and this proprioceptive deficit, is it's all about your body saying, hey, it's not safe. And so how can you create an environment where you're able to build a conscious, mindful connection to the muscle around the joint, but then also really make sure that your body feels that this is a safe position to be in? And what's going to create that sensation of active suctioning the ball into the socket, where that just happens passively at the right angles, with that conscious level of engagement? And this is when one of my friends who's a circus performer and someone who's hypermobile prescribed me handstands, which, to be honest, I was quite afraid of still, even at this stage of the process. We're like 5 months in, and I had done all this rehab on my own, all this self-discovery, and yeah, I was still scared to try that, because I had been hanging on the bar here and there, and if I just kind of let my brain wander and I wasn't thinking about like engage, then whoop, it was getting smaller. It wasn't like when it first happened, it was just like boom, like you're out. It was like you're like a little bit out, but not all the way. But even that sensation is enough to be like, okay, that's the wrong direction. Like, don't do these things. We're not there yet. And so the handstand felt like this scary movement where it's like, that feels like it could be really bad. But I gave it a shot, and it was like unlocking the perfect movement that I needed for this mindful, conscious activation, but also this passive suctioning of the arm into the socket. And this was the critical phase of adaptation, getting me to the confident point that I am now, where I can once again do weighted pull-ups. And I can just hang passively with added weight and my arm stays in the socket. So I had to, at first, just get used to this handstand position and like not freak out that my arm was going to go somewhere, just figure out internally, okay, we're finding the engagement. But then from there, actually getting confident in those positions is adding walking into the handstand. And for this, I use a wall so that you can just focus on the shoulder joint. I don't have the most perfect handstand yet. But that movement of balancing and shifting your weight while you're upside down, while you're trying to find a handstand line, neurologically forces you to recalibrate, because all of a sudden the GPS that you're using to walk around and when you want to stay upright on your feet, you can't just default to those same neurological patterns. Your brain has to, figure out how to make new ones for this new position where you're upside down, which is super, super useful when you're trying to overcome these invisible problems. Because now that GPS has to build a new pathway, recalibrate the joint position, and there's no barrier of like, hey, let's use this other pathway that is keeping us safe because we had this injury. It's like, okay, no, we just need to find an entirely new way of being in this new position. Which brings me to where I am now after this long process, and I would say there's still some level of unconfidence, but I feel like I've made more than a full recovery. My joint, when this first happened, would just pop out constantly, and I can say for certainty this shoulder does not pop any more than the other shoulder, and I can once again hang passively with weights and do a pull-up, which feels like a pretty big achievement, even though it's 8 months later. But I felt like I should at least just talk about my experience and what I went through, because this was a long 8-month process that was very lonely, and there were a lot of people who gave me thoughts that only the contrary was possible. But if you believe in yourself, and if you believe in your body, and if you don't accept those sentiments, then you might be surprised what you're able to find. And I think you should follow that and follow your intuition. And for me, there are so many points where it was like, I'm having this sensation, I'm having these very real feelings, and I know there's nothing on the outside to indicate that any of this is going on. but I need to trust those feelings, and I need to, through this rehab process, follow exactly what I'm feeling. Because no one can tell you, like, hey, now it's time to jump to this next exercise, right? Like, that's something I had to feel out, going from, okay, I'm holding a weight and finding this tension, to, oh, there's something there. Now I need to go foam roll. Now I need to massage. I need to get this tissue broken up. Now that there's space and there's some movement, okay, now I can do some assisted hanging. Now I can start to strength train a little bit and slowly build that awareness. And it just became this iterative process. But every step along the way, I had to trust that I was exactly in the place I was supposed to be, and that all of my feelings are telling me something important that I need to listen to. So listen to your body, listen to your intuition, and trust yourself. Out of all the things that I learned through this process and understanding my body, understanding anatomy, understanding the healing process, there was just absolutely nothing more important than learning to trust yourself and trust what you're feeling. That alone has driven so much positive change in my life, to where I just feel more in tune with myself. I feel like my whole life is rebalanced now, where I'm dedicating time to more spontaneous living. I'm able to go with the flow more. I'm able to self-advocate and communicate with people in my personal life, and all my relationships have benefited from that. So if there's one thing to take away from this experience, if you're watching and going through something similar, no matter where you are and, you know, what craziness you think might be going on or that is going on, like, just know that you're not crazy. If your body's sending you a signal, it's probably telling you something, and if you're feeling something, you know, you're probably feeling it for a reason, and you should trust those signals and trust your body, trust your intuition, and ultimately trust your rhythm, and don't sacrifice that for anyone, even if they're an authority figure. We live in a system, especially medically, that's very hierarchical, lots of experts, lots of people who stand to gain and profit, and that can make it hard to navigate, but you can always come back to your own rhythm. And it took 8 months to heal, but now I'm healed and I'm stronger, and like that 8 months was worth every bit of the effort that it took to get here. And so just be patient and know that you're exactly where you need to be on your on your path, on your journey, in the process of your own healing. And yeah, trust that, love yourself and where you are. If you enjoyed this video, let me know, and thank you so much for watching.